Hi all, Larry Powell II here with another reading video where I'm reading from The Eye of the World, Book 1 in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. And today I'm reading chapter number 40. Chapter 40, The Web Tightens. It seemed to Rand that he was sitting at table with Logain and Moraine. The Aes Sedai and the false dragon sat watching him silently as if neither knew the other was there. Abruptly he realized the walls of the room were becoming indistinct, fading off into gray. A sense of urgency built in him. Everything was blurring away. When he looked back to the table, Moraine and Logain had vanished, and Balsamon sat there instead. Rand's whole body vibrated with urgency. It hummed inside his head, louder and louder. The hum became the pounding of blood in his ears. With a jerk, he sat up and immediately groaned and clutched his head, swaying. His whole skull hurt. His left hand found sticky dampness in his hair. He was sitting on the ground on green grass. That troubled him vaguely, but his head spun and everything he looked at lurched, and all he could think of was lying down until it stopped. The wall, the girl's voice. Steadying himself with one hand flat on the grass, he looked around slowly. He had to do it slowly. When he tried to turn his head quickly, everything started whirling again. He was in a garden or a park. A slate-paved walk meandered by through flowering bushes not 6 feet away, with a white stone bench beside it and a leafy arbor over the bench for shade. He had fallen inside the wall, and the girl. He found the tree close behind his back and found her, too, climbing down out of it. She reached the ground and turned to face him, and he blinked and groaned again. A deep blue velvet cloak, lined with pale fur, rested on her shoulders, its hood hanging down behind to her waist with a cluster of silver bells at the peak. They jingled when she moved. A silver filigree circlet held her long red gold curls, and delicate silver rings hung at her ears, while a necklace of heavy silver links and dark green stones he thought were emeralds lay around her throat. Her pale blue dress was smudged with bark stains from her tree climbing, but it was still silk and embroidered with painstakingly intricate designs. The skirt slashed with inserts the color of rich cream. A wide belt of woven silver encircled her waist, and velvet slippers peeked from under the hem of her dress. He had only ever seen 2 women dressed in this fashion, Moraine and the dark friend who had tried to kill Matt and him. He could not begin to imagine who would choose to climb trees in clothes like that. But he was sure she had to be someone important. The way she was looking at him redoubled the impression. She did not seem in the least troubled at having a stranger tumble into her garden. There was a self-possession about her that made him think of Nineveh or Moraine. He was so enmeshed in worrying whether or not he had gotten himself into trouble, whether or not she was someone who could and would call the Queen's Guard even on a day when they had other things to occupy them, that it took him a few moments to see past the elaborate clothes and lofty attitude to the girl herself. She was perhaps 2 or 3 years younger than he, tall for a girl and beautiful, her face a perfect oval framed by that mass of sunburst curls. Her lips full and red, her eyes bluer than he could believe. She was completely different from Egwene in height and face and body, but every bit as beautiful. He felt a twinge of guilt, but told himself that denying what his eyes saw would not bring Egwene close safely to Camlin one whit faster. A scrabbling sound came from up in the tree, and bits of bark fell, followed by a boy dropping lightly to the ground behind her. He was a head taller than she and a little older, but his face and hair marked him as her close kin. His coat and cloak were red and white and gold, embroidered and brocaded, and for a male even more ornate than hers. That increased Rand's anxiety. Only on a feast day would any ordinary man dress in anything like that, and never with that much grandeur. This was no public park. Perhaps the guards were too busy to bother with trespassers. The boy studied Rand over the girl's shoulder, fingering the dagger at his waist. It seemed more a nervous habit than any thought that he might use it. Not completely, though. The boy had the same self-possession as the girl, and they both looked at him as if he were a puzzle to be solved. He had the odd feeling that the girl at least was cataloging everything about him, from the condition of his boots to the state of his cloak. "We will never hear the end of this, Elaine. If Mother finds out," the boy said suddenly. "She told us to stay in our rooms, but you just had to get a look at Logain, didn't you? Now look what it has got us." "Be quiet, Gowan." She was clearly the younger of the two, but she spoke as though she took it for granted that he would obey. The boy's face struggled as if he had more to say, but to Rand's surprise he held his peace. "Are you all right?" she said suddenly. It took Rand a minute to realize she was speaking to him. When he did, he tried to struggle to his feet. "I'm fine, he tottered, and his legs gave way. He sat back down hard. His head swam. "I'll just climb back over the wall," he muttered. He attempted to stand again, but she put a hand on his shoulder, pressing him down. He was so dizzy the slight pressure was enough to hold him in place. "You are hurt." Gracefully she knelt beside him. Her fingers gently parted the blood-matted hair on the left side of his head. "You must have struck a branch coming down. You will be lucky if you didn't break anything more than your scalp. I don't think I ever saw anyone as skillful at climbing as you, but you don't do so well falling." "You'll get blood on your hands," he said, drawing back. Firmly she pulled his head back to where she could get at it. "Hold still." She did not speak sharply, but again there was that note in her voice as if she expected to be obeyed. "It does not look too bad, thank the light." From pockets on the inside of her cloak, she began taking out an array of tiny vials and twisted packets of paper, finishing with a handful of watered bandage. He stared at the collection in amazement. It was the sort of thing he would have expected a wisdom to carry, not someone dressed as she was. She had gotten blood on her fingers, he saw, but it did not seem to bother her. "Give me your water flask, Gowan," she said. "I need to wash this." The boy she called Gowan unfastened the leather bottle from his belt and handed it to her, then squatted easily at Rand's feet with his arms folded on his knees. Elaine went about what she was doing in a very workmanlike manner. He did not flinch at the sting of cold water when she washed the cut in his scalp, but she held the top of his head with one hand as if she expected him to try to pull away again, and would have none of it. The ointment she smoothed on after from one of her small vials soothed almost as much as one of Nenev's preparations would have. Gowan smiled at him as she worked, a calming smile, as if he too expected Rand to jerk away and maybe even run. "She's always finding stray cats and birds with broken wings. You are the first human being she has had to work on." He hesitated, then added, "Do not be offended. I am not calling you a stray. It was not an apology, just a statement of fact." "No offense taken," Rand said stiffly. but the pair were acting as if he were a skittish horse. She does know what she is doing, Gowan said. She has had the best teachers, so do not fear. You are in good hands. Elaine pressed some of the bandaging against his temple and pulled a silk scarf from her belt. Blue and cream and gold. For any girl in Edmondsfield, it would have been a treasured feast day cloth. Elaine deftly began winding it around his head to hold the wad of bandage in place. You can't use that, he protested. She went on winding. I told you to hold still, she said calmly. Rand looked at Gowan. Does she always expect people to do what she tells them? A flash of surprise crossed the young man's face, and his mouth tightened with amusement. Most of the time she does, and most of the time they do. Hold this, Elaine said. Put your hand there while I tie. She exclaimed at the sight of his hands. You did not do that falling. Climbing where you should not have been climbing is more like it. Quickly finishing her knot, she turned his hands palm upward in front of him, muttering to herself about how little water was left. The washing made the lacerations burn, but her touch was surprisingly delicate. Hold still this time. The vial of ointment was produced again. She spread it thinly along the scrapes, all of her attention apparently on rubbing it in without hurting him. The coolness spread through his hands as if she were rubbing the torn places away. Most of the time they do exactly what she says, Gowan went on, with an affectionate grin at the top of her head. Most people, not Mother, of course, or Elaine, and not Lenny. Lenny was her nurse. You can't give orders to someone who switched you for stealing figs when you were little, and even not so little. Elaine raised her head long enough to give him a dangerous look. He cleared his throat and carefully blanked his expression before hurrying on. And Gareth, of course. No one gives orders to Gareth, not even Mother, Elaine said, bending her head back over Rand's hands. She makes suggestions, and he always does what she suggests, but I've never heard her give him a command. She shook her head. I don't know why that always surprises you, Gowan answered her. Even you don't try to telling Gareth what to do. He's served 3 queens and been Captain General and First Prince Regent for 2. I dare say there are some think he's more a symbol of the throne of Andor than the Queen is. Mother should go ahead and marry him, she said absently. Her attention was on Rand's hands. She wants to. She can't hide it from me, and it would solve so many problems. Gowan shook his head. One of them must bend first. Mother cannot, and Gareth will not. If she commanded him, he would obey, I think, but she won't. You know she won't. Abruptly, they turned to stare at Rand. He had the feeling they had forgotten he was there. Who? He had to stop to wet his lips. Who is your mother? Elaine's eyes widened in surprise, but Gowan spoke in an ordinary tone that made his words all the more jarring. Morghese, by the grace of the light, Queen of Andor, protector of the realm, defender of the people, high seat of the house Tricand. The Queen, Rand muttered, shock spreading through him in waves of numbness. For a minute he thought his head was going to begin spinning again. Don't attract any attention, just fall into the Queen's garden and let the daughter heir tend your cuts like a hedge doctor. He wanted to laugh and knew it for the fringes of panic. Drawing a deep breath, he scrambled hastily to his feet. He held himself tightly in rein against the urge to run, but the need to get away filled him, to get away before anyone else discovered him there. Elaine and Gowan watched him calmly, and when he leaped up, they rose gracefully, not hurried in the least. He put up his hand to pull the scarf from his head, And Elaine seized his elbow. "Stop that. You will start the bleeding again." Her voice was still calm, still sure that he would do as he was told. "I have to go," Rand said. "I'll just climb back over the wall and..." "You really didn't know?" For the first time she seemed as startled as he was. "Do you mean you climbed up on that wall to see Logain without even knowing where you were? You could have gotten a much better view down in the streets." I don't like crowds," he mumbled. He sketched a bow to each of them. "If you'll pardon me, my lady," in the stories, royal courts were full of people all calling one another lord and lady, and royal highness and majesty. But if he had ever heard the correct form of address for the daughter heir, he could not think clearly enough to remember. He could not think clearly about anything beyond the need to be far away. "If you will pardon me, I'll just leave now. Thank you for the..." He touched the scarf around his head. "Thank you." "Without even telling us your name," Gowan said. "A poor payment for Elaine's care. I've been wondering about you. You sound like an Endor man, though not a Camliner, certainly, but you look like..." "Well, you know our names. Courtesy would suggest you give us yours." Looking longingly at the wall, Rand gave his right name before he thought what he was doing, and even added, "From Evansfield in the Two Rivers." "From the west," Gowan murmured. "Very far to the west." Rand looked around at him sharply. There had been a note of surprise in the young man's voice, and Rand caught some of it still on his face when he turned. Gowan replaced it with a pleasant smile, so quickly, though, that he almost doubted what he had seen. "Tabak and wool," Gowan said. "I have to know the principal products of every part of the realm, of every land, for that matter. Part of my training, principal products and crafts, and what the people are like, their customs, their strengths and weaknesses. It said Two Rivers. People are stubborn. They can be led if they think they are worthy. But the harder you try to push them, the harder they dig in. Elaine ought to choose her husband from there. It'll take a man with a will like stone to keep from being trampled by her." Rand stared at him. Elaine was staring too. Gowan looked as much under control as ever, but he was babbling. "Why? What's this?" All three of them jumped at the sudden voice and spun to face it. The young man who stood there was the handsomest man Rand had ever seen, almost too handsome for masculinity. He was tall and slender, but his movement spoke of whipcord strength and a sure confidence. Dark of hair and eye, he wore his clothes only a little less elaborate in red and white than Gowan's, as if they were of no importance. One hand rested on his sword hilt, and his eyes were steady on Rand. "Stand away from him, Elaine," the man said. "You too, Gowan." Elaine stepped in front of Rand, between him and the newcomer, head high and as confident as ever. "He is a loyal subject of our mother, and a good queen's man, and he is under my protection, Galad." Rand tried to remember what he had heard from Master Kench, and since from Master Gil. Galadriel de Madrid was Elaine's half-brother. Elaine's and Gowan's, if he remembered correctly. The three shared the same father. Master Kench might not have liked Tarangale de Madre too well, neither did anyone else that he had heard, but the son was well thought of by wearers of the red and the white alike, if talk in the city was any guide. "I am aware of your fondness for strays, Elaine," the slender man said reasonably, "but the fellow is armed, and he hardly looks reputable. In these days we cannot be too careful. If he is a loyal queen's man, what is he doing here where he does not belong? It is easy enough to change the wrappings on a sword, Elaine." "He is here as my guest, Galad, and I vouch for him? Or have you appointed yourself my nurse to decide whom I may talk to and when?" Her voice was rich with scorn, but Galad seemed unmoved. "You know I make no claims for control over your actions, Elaine, but this guest of yours is not proper, and you know that as well as I." Gawain helped me convince her our mother would. "Enough," Elaine snapped. "You are right that you have no say over my actions, nor have you any right to judge them. You may leave me now." Galad gave Gawain a rueful look. At one and the same time it seemed to ask for help, while saying that Elaine was too headstrong to be helped. Elaine's face darkened, but just as she opened her mouth again, he bowed in all formality, yet with the grace of a cat, took a step back, then turned and strode down the paved path, his long legs carrying him quickly out of sight beyond the arbor. "I hate him," Elaine breathed. "He is vile and full of envy." "There you go too far, Elaine," Gawain said. Galahad does not know the meaning of envy. Twice he has saved my life, with none to know if he held his hand. If he had not, he would be your first prince of the sword in my place." "Never, Gawain. I would choose anyone before Galad. Anyone." The lowest stable boy. Suddenly she smiled and gave her brother a mock stern look. "You say I am fond of giving orders. Well, I command you to let nothing happen to you. I command you to be my first prince of the sword when I take the throne. The light sin that day is far off, and to lead the armies of Andor with the sword of honor Galad cannot dream of." "As you command, my lady," Gawain laughed, his bow a parody of Galad's. Elaine gave Rand a thoughtful frown. "Now we must get you out of here quickly." "Galad always does the right thing," Gawain explained, "even when he should not. In this case, finding a stranger in the gardens, the right thing is to notify the palace guards, which I suspect he is on his way to do right this minute." "Then it's time I was back over the wall," Rand said. "A fine day for going unnoticed. I might as well carry a sign." He turned to the wall, but Elaine caught his arm. "Not after the trouble I went to with your hands. You'll only make fresh scrapes, and then let some back alley crone put the white knows what on them. There is a small gate on the other side of the garden. It's overgrown, and no one but me even remembers it's there." Suddenly Rand heard boots pounding toward them over the flat paving stones. "Too late," Gawain muttered. He must have started running as soon as he was out of eyeshot. Elaine growled an oath, and Rand's eyebrows shot up. He had heard that one from the stablemen at the Queen's blessing, and had been shocked then. The next moment she was in cool self-possession once more. Gawain and Elaine appeared content to remain where they were, but he could not make himself stay for the Queen's guard with such equanimity. He started once more for the wall, knowing he would be no more than halfway up before the guards arrived, but unable to stand still. Before he had taken 3 steps, red uniformed men burst into sight, breastplates catching the sun as they dashed up the path. Others came like breaking waves of scarlet and polished steel, seemingly from every direction. Some held drawn swords, others only waited to set their boots before raising bows and knocking feathered shafts behind the barred-faced guards. Every eye was grim, and every broadhead arrow was pointed unwaveringly at him. Elaine and Gawain leaped as one, putting themselves between him and the arrows, their arms spread to cover him. He stood very still and kept his hands in plain sight, away from his sword, while the thud of boots and the creak of bowstrings still hung in the air. One of the soldiers, with the golden knot of an officer on his shoulder, shouted, "My lady, my lord, down quickly!" Despite her outstretched arms, Elaine drew herself up regally. You dare to bring bare steel into my presence, Talanvar? Garath Bryn, will have you mucking stables with the meanest trooper for this, if you are lucky. The soldiers exchanged puzzled glances, and some of the bowmen uneasily half lowered their bows. Only then did Elaine let her arms down, as if she had only held them up because she wished to. Gawain hesitated, then followed her example. Rand could count the bows that had not been lowered. The muscles of his stomach tensed as though they could stop a broadhead shaft at 20 paces. The man with the officer's knot seemed the most perplexed of all. My lady, forgive me, but Lord Galadedrid reported a dirty peasant skulking in the gardens, armed and endangering my lady Elaine and my Lord Gawain. His eyes went to Rand, and his voice firmed. If my lady and my lord will please to step aside, I will take the villain into custody. There is too much riffraff in the city these days. I doubt very much if Galad reported anything of the kind, Elaine said. Galad does not lie. Sometimes I wish he would, Gawain said softly for Rand's ear. Just once. It might make living with him easier. This man is my guest, Elaine continued, and here under my protection you may withdraw, Talanvar. I regret that will not be possible, my lady. As my lady knows, the queen, your lady mother, has given orders regarding anyone on palace grounds without her majesty's permission, and word has been sent to her majesty of this intruder. There was more than a hint of satisfaction in Talanvar's voice. Rand suspected the officer had to accept their other commands from Elaine, that he did not think proper this time. The man was not about to, not when he had a perfect excuse. Elaine stared back at Talanvar. For once she seemed at a loss. Rand looked a question at Gawain, and Gawain understood. Prison, he murmured. Rand's face went white, and the young man added quickly, only for a few days, and you will not be harmed. You'll be questioned by Gareth Bryn and the Captain General personally, but you will be set free once it's clear you meant no harm. He paused, hidden thoughts in his eyes. I hope you were telling the truth, Rand al'Thor from the Two Rivers. You will conduct all three of us to my mother, Elaine announced. Suddenly, a grin bloomed on Gawain's face. Behind the steel bars across his face, Talanvar appeared taken aback. My lady, or else conduct all three of us to a cell, Elaine said. We will remain together, or will you give orders for hands to be laid upon my person? Her smile was victorious, and the way Talanvar looked around as if he expected to find help in the trees said he too thought she had won. Won what? How? Mother is viewing Logain, Gawain said softly, as if he had read Rand's thoughts, and even if she was not busy, Talanvar would not dare troop into her presence with Elaine and me, as if we were under guard. Mother has a bit of a temper sometimes. Rand remembered what Master Gil had said about Queen Morgase, a bit of a temper. Another red-uniformed soldier came running down the path, skidding to a halt to salute with an arm across his chest. He spoke softly to Talanvar, and his words brought satisfaction back to Talanvar's face. The Queen, your lady mother, Talanvar announced, commands me to bring the intruder to her immediately. It is also the Queen's command that my lady Elaine and my lord Gawain attend her also immediately. Gawain winced, and Elaine swallowed hard. Her face composed, she still began industriously brushing at the stains on her dress. Aside from dislodging a few pieces of bark, her efforts did little good. If my lady pleases, Talanvar said smugly, my lord. The soldiers formed around them in a hollow box that started along the slate path, with Talonbar leading. Gowan and Elaine walked on either side of Rand, both appearing lost in unpleasant thoughts. The soldiers had sheathed their swords and returned their arrows to quivers, but they were no less on guard than when they had had their weapons in hand. They watched Rand as if they expected him at any moment to snatch his sword and try to cut his way to freedom. Try anything. I won't try anything unnoticed, ha. Watching the soldiers watching him, he suddenly became aware of the garden. He had regained his balance completely since the fall. One thing had happened after another, each new shock coming before the last had a chance to fade, and his surroundings had been a blur except for the wall and his devout wish to be back on the other side of it. Now he saw the green grass that had only tickled the back of his mind before. Green, 100 shades of green, trees and bushes green and thriving, thick with leaves and fruit, lush vines covering arbors over the path, flowers everywhere, so many flowers spraying the garden with color. Some he knew, bright golden sunbursts and tiny pink tallow end, crimson star blaze, and purple Edmund's glory, rose in every color from purest white to deep, deep red. But others were strange, so fanciful in shape and hue, he wondered if they could be real. It's green, he whispered. Green. The soldiers muttered to themselves. Talonbar gave them a sharp look over his shoulder, and they fell silent. Elaine's work, Gowan said absently. It is not right, Elaine said. She asked if I wanted to pick out the one farm she could do the same for, while all around it the crops still failed. But it still isn't right for us to have flowers when there are people who do not have enough to eat. She drew a deep breath and refilled her self-possession. Remember yourself, she told Rand briskly. Speak up clearly when you're spoken to, and keep silent otherwise, and follow my lead. All will be well. Rand wished he could share her confidence. It would have helped if Gowan had seemed to have it as well. As Talonbar led them into the palace, he looked back at the garden, at all the green streaked with blossoms, colors wrought for a queen by an Aes Sedai's hand. He was in deep water, and there was no bank in sight. Palace servants filled the halls in red liveries with collars and cuffs of white, the white lion on the left breast of their tunics, scurrying about, intent on tasks that were not readily apparent. When the soldiers trooped by, with Elaine and Gowan and Rand in their midst, they stopped dead in their tracks to stare open-mouthed. Through the middle of all the consternation, a gray-striped tomcat wandered unconcernedly down the hall, weaving between the goggling servants. Suddenly the cat struck Rand as odd. He had been in Barlon long enough to know that even the meanest shop had cats lurking in every corner. Since entering the palace, the Tom was the only cat he had seen. You don't have rats, he said in disbelief. Every place had rats. Elaine doesn't like rats, Gowan muttered vaguely. He was frowning worriedly down the hall, apparently already seeing the coming meeting with the Queen. We never have rats. Both of you be quiet. Elaine's voice was sharp, but as absent as her brother's. I am trying to think. Rand watched the cat over his shoulder until the guards took him around the corner, hiding the Tom from sight. A lot of cats would have made him feel better. It would have been nice if there was one thing normal about the palace, even if it was rats. The path Talonbar took turned so many times that Rand lost his sense of direction. Finally, the young officer stopped before tall double doors of dark wood with a rich glow, not so grand as some they had passed, but still carved all over with rows of lions, finely wrought in detail. A liveried servant stood to either side. At least it isn't the Grand Hall. Gowan laughed unsteadily. I never heard that Mom commanded anyone's head cut off from here. He sounded as if he thought she might set a precedent. Talonvor reached for Rand's sword, but Elaine moved to cut him off. He is my guest, and by custom and law, guests of the royal family may go armed even in Mother's presence. Or will you deny my word that he is my guest? Talonvor hesitated, locking eyes with her, then nodded. Very well, my lady. She smiled at Rand as Talonvor stepped back. But it lasted only a moment. First rank to accompany me, Talonvor commanded. Announce the Lady Elaine and the Lord Gowan to Her Majesty, she told the door's keepers. Also, Guardsman Lieutenant Talonvor at Her Majesty's command, with the intruder under guard. Elaine scowled at Talonvor, but the doors were already swinging open. A sonorous voice sounded, announcing those who came. Grandly, Elaine swept through the doors, spoiling her regal entrance only a little by motioning for Rand to keep close behind her. Gowan squared his shoulders and strode in, flanking her one measured pace to her rear. Rand followed, uncertainly keeping level with Gowan on her other side. Talonvor stayed close to Rand, and 10 soldiers came with him. The doors closed silently behind them. Suddenly, Elaine dropped into a deep curtsy, simultaneously bowing from the waist, and stayed there, holding her skirt wide. Rand gave a start, then hastily emulated Gowan and the other men, shifting awkwardly. Until he had it right. Down on his right knee, head bowed, bending forward to press the knuckles of his right hand against the marble tiles, his left hand resting on the end of his sword hilt. Gowan, without a sword, put his hand on his dagger the same way. Ram was just congratulating himself on getting it right when he noticed Talonvor, his head still bent, glaring sideways at him from behind his face guard. Was I supposed to do something else? He was suddenly angry that Talonvor expected him to know what to do when no one had told him, and angry over being afraid of the guards he had done nothing to be fearful for. He knew his fear was not Talonvor's fault, but he was angry at him anyway. Everyone held their positions, frozen as if waiting for the spring thaw. He did not know what they were waiting for, but he took the opportunity to study the place to which he had been brought. He kept his head down, just turning it enough to see. Talonvor's scowl deepened, but he ignored it. The square chamber was about the size of the common room at the Queen's blessing, its walls presenting hunting scenes carved in relief in stone of the purest white. The tapestries between the carvings were gentle images of bright flowers and brilliantly plumaged hummingbirds, except for the two at the far end of the room, where the white lion of Andor stood taller than a man on scarlet fields. Those two hangings flanked the dais, and on the dais a carved and gilded throne where sat the Queen. A bluff, blocky man stood bareheaded by the Queen's right hand in the red of the Queen's guard, with 4 golden knots on the shoulder of his cloak, and wide golden bands breaking the white of his cuffs. His temples were heavy with gray, but he looked as strong and immovable as a rock. That had to be the Captain General Gareth Bryn. Behind the throne and to the other side, a woman in deep green silk sat on a low stool, knitting something out of dark, almost black wool. At first, the knitting made Rand think she was old, but at a second glance, he could not put an age to her at all. Young, old, he did not know. Her attention seemed to be entirely on her needles and yarn, just as if there were not a queen within arm's reach of her. She was a handsome woman, outwardly placid, yet there was something terrible in her concentration. There was no sound in the room except for the click of her needles. He tried to look at everything, yet his eyes kept going back to the woman with the gleaming wreath of finely wrought roses on her brow, the rose crown of Andor, a long red stole, the lion of Andor, marching along its length, hung over her silken dress of red and white pleats. And when she touched the Captain General's arm with her left hand, a ring in the shape of the great serpent eating its own tail glittered. Yet it was not the grandeur of clothes or jewelry or even crown that drew Rand's eyes again and again. It was the woman who wore them. Morghese had her daughter's beauty, matured and ripened her face and figure. Her presence filled the room like a light that dimmed the other two with her. If she had been a widow in Evansville, she would have had a line of suitors. I'm doing a video. Would have had a line of suitors outside her door, even if she was the worst cook and most slovenly housekeeper in the Two Rivers. He saw her studying him and ducked his head, afraid she might be able to tell his thoughts from his face, like thinking about the queen like she was a village woman. You fool. You may rise, Morghese said in a rich, warm voice that held Elaine's assurance of obedience 100 times over. Rand stood with the rest. Mother, Elaine began, but Morghese cut her off. You have been climbing trees, it seems, daughter. Elaine plucked a stray fragment of bark from her dress and, finding there was no place to put it, held it clenched in her hand. In fact, Morghese went on calmly, it would seem that despite my orders to the contrary, you have contrived to take your look at this Logain. Gawain, I have thought better of you. You must learn not only to obey your sister, but at the same time to counterweight for her against danger, or against disaster. The queen's eyes swung to the blocky man beside her, then quickly away again. Bren remained impassive, as if he had not noticed, but Rand thought those eyes noticed everything. That, Gawain, is as much the duty of the first prince as is leading the armies of Andor. Perhaps if your training is intensified, you will find less time for letting your sister lead you into trouble. I will ask the Captain General to see that you do not lack for things to do on the journey north. Gawain shifted his feet as if about to protest, then bowed his head instead. As you command, Mother. Elaine grimaced. Mother, Gawain cannot keep me out of trouble if he is not with me. It was for that reason alone he left his rooms. Mother, surely there could be no harm in just looking at Logain. Almost everyone in the city was closer to him than we. Everyone in the city is not the daughter heir. Sharpness underlay the queen's voice. I have seen this fellow Logain from close, and he is dangerous, child, caged with Aes Sedai to guard him every minute. He is still as dangerous as a wolf. I wish he had never been brought near Camlin. He will be dealt with in Tarvalon. The woman on the stool did not take her eyes from her knitting as she spoke. What is important is that the people see that the light has once again vanquished the dark, and that they see you are part of that victory, Morghese. Morghese waved a dismissive hand. I would still rather he had never come near Camlin, Elaine. I know your mind. Mother, Elaine protested. I do mean to obey you. Truly I do. You do? Morghese asked in mock surprise, then chuckled. Yes, you do try to be a dutiful daughter, but you constantly test how far you may go. Well, I did the same with my mother. That spirit will stand you in good stead when you ascend to the throne, but you are not queen yet, child. You have disobeyed me and had your look at Logain. Be satisfied with that. On the journey north you will not be allowed within 100 paces of him, neither you nor Gowan. If I did not know just how hard your lessons will be in Tarvalon, I would send Lenny along to see that you obey. She at least seems able to make you do as you must. Elaine bowed her head sullenly. The woman behind the throne seemed occupied with counting her stitches. In 1 week, she said suddenly, you will be wanting to come home to your mother. In a month, you will be wanting to run away with the traveling people. But my sisters will keep you away from the unbeliever. That sort of thing is not for you, not yet. Abruptly, she turned on the stool to look intently at Elaine, all her placidity gone, as if it had never been. You have it in you to be the greatest queen that Andor has ever seen, that any land has seen in more than 1,000 years. It is for that we will shape you if you have the strength for it. Rand stared at her. She had to be allayed. The Aes Sedai. Suddenly he was glad he had not come to her for help. No matter what her Aja, a sternness far beyond Moraine's, radiated from her. He had sometimes thought of Moraine as steel covered with velvet. With Elaide, the velvet was only an illusion. Enough, Elaide, Morgase said, frowning uneasily. She has heard that more than enough. The will weaves as the will wills. For a moment she was silent, looking at her daughter. Now there is the problem of this young man. She gestured to Rand without taking her eyes off Elaine's face. And how and why he came here, and why you claim guest right for him to your brother. May I speak, Mother? When Morgase nodded her assent, Elaine told of events simply. From the time she first saw Rand climbing up the slope to the wall, he expected her to finish by proclaiming the innocence of what he had done, but instead she said, Mother, often you tell me I must know our people from the highest to the lowest. But whenever I meet any of them, it is with a dozen attendants. How can I come to know anything real or true under such circumstances? In speaking with this young man, I have already learned more about the people of the Two Rivers, what kind of people they are, than I ever could from books. It says something that he has come so far. It says something that he has come so far and has put on the red, when so many incomers wear the white from fear. Mother, I beg you not to misuse a loyal subject and one who has taught me much about the people you rule. A loyal subject from the Two Rivers, Morgase sighed. My child, you should pay more heed to those books. The Two Rivers has not seen a tax collector in 6 generations, nor the Queen's Guard in 7. I dare say they seldom even think to remember they are part of the realm. Rand shrugged uncomfortably, recalling his surprise when he was told the Two Rivers was part of the realm of Andor. The Queen saw him and smiled ruefully at her daughter. You see, child. Elaine had put down her knitting, Rand realized, and was studying him. She rose from her stool and slowly came down from the dais to stand before him. From the Two Rivers, she said. She reached a hand toward his head. He pulled away from her touch, and she let her hand drop. With that red in his hair and gray eyes, Two Rivers people are dark of hair and eye, and they seldom have such height. Her hand darted out to push back his coat sleeve, exposing lighter skin the sun had not reached so often, or such skin. It was an effort not to clench his fists. I was born in Evansfield, he said stiffly. My mother was an outlander. That's where my eyes come from. My father is Tam Thor, a shepherd and farmer as I am. Elaine nodded slowly, never taking her eyes from his face. He met her gaze with a levelness that belied the sour feeling in his stomach. He saw her note the steadiness of his look, still meeting him eye to eye. She moved her hand slowly toward him again. He resolved not to flinch this time. It was his sword she touched, not him, her hand closing around the hilt at the very top. her fingers tightening and her eyes opened wide with surprise. "A shepherd from the two rivers," she said softly, and a whisper meant to be heard by all, "with a heron-marked sword." Those last few words acted on the chamber as if she had announced the Dark One. Leather and metal creaked behind Rand, boots scuttling on the marble tiles. From the corner of his eye he could see Talonvor and another of the guardsmen backing away from him to gain room, hands on their swords, preparing to draw, and from their faces, prepared to die. In 2 quick strides, Gareth Bryn was at the front of the dais between Rand and the Queen. Even Gawain put himself in front of Elaine, a worried look on his face and a hand on his dagger. Elaine herself looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. Morghese did not change expression, but her hands tightened on the gilded arms of her throne. Only Elaine showed less reaction than the Queen. The Aes Sedai gave no sign that she had said anything out of the ordinary. She took her hand from the sword, causing the soldiers to tense even more. Her eyes stayed on his, unruffled and calculating. "Surely," Morghese said, her voice level, "he is too young to have earned a heron-marked blade. He cannot be any older than Gawain." "It belongs with him," Gareth Bryn said. The Queen looked at him in surprise. "How can that be?" "I do not know," Morghese Bryn said slowly. "He is too young, yet still it belongs with him, and he with it. Look at his eyes, the look, how he stands, how the sword fits him. And he is too young, but the sword is his." When the Captain General fell silent, Elaine said, "How did you come by this blade, Randolph Thor, from the two rivers?" She said it as if she doubted his name as much as she did where he was from. "My father gave it to me," Rand said. "It was his. He thought I'd need a sword out in the world." "Yet another shepherd from the two rivers with a heron-marked blade." Elaine's smile made his mouth go dry. "When did you arrive in Camlin?" He had had enough of telling this woman the truth. She made him as afraid as any dark friend had. It was time to start hiding again. "Today," he said, "this morning, just in time." She murmured, "Where are you staying? Don't say you have not found a room somewhere. You look a little tattered, but you have had a chance to freshen. Where?" "The Crown and Lion." He remembered passing the Crown and Lion while looking for the Queen's blessing. It was on the other side of the new city from Master Gill's inn. "I have a bed there in the attic." He had the feeling that she knew he was lying, but she only nodded. "What chance this?" she said. "Today the unbeliever is brought into Camlin. In 2 days he will be taken north to Tarvalon, and with him goes the daughter heir for her training. And at just this juncture, a young man appears in the palace gardens claiming to be a loyal subject from the two rivers." "I am from the two rivers." They were all looking at him, but all ignored him, all but Talonvor and the guards. Those eyes never blinked. With a story calculated to entice Elaine, and bearing a heron-marked blade. He does not wear an armband or a cocker to proclaim his allegiance, but wrappings that carefully conceal the heron from inquisitive eyes. "What chance this, Morghese?" The Queen motioned the Captain General to stand aside, and when he did, she studied Rand with a troubled look. It was to Elaine that she spoke, though. "What are you naming him? Dark Friend? One of Loghain's followers?" "The Dark One stirs in Shalgol," the Aes Sedai replied. "The shadow lies across the pattern, and the future is balanced on the point of a pin. This one is dangerous." Suddenly Elaine moved, throwing herself onto her knees before the throne. "Mother, I beg you not to harm him. He would have left immediately had I not stopped him. He wanted to go. It was I who made him stay. I cannot believe he is a Dark Friend." Morghese gave a soothing gesture toward her daughter, but her eyes remained on Rand. "Is this a foretelling, Elaine? Are you reading the pattern? You say that it comes on you when you least expect it and goes as suddenly as it comes. If this is a foretelling, Elaide, I command you to speak the truth clearly, without your usual habit of wrapping it in so much mystery that no one can tell if you have said yes or no. Speak, what do you see? This I foretell, Elaide replied, and swear under the light that I can say no clearer. From this day Andor marches toward pain and division. The shadow has yet to darken to its blackest, and I cannot see if the light will come after. Where the world has wept one tear, it will weep thousands. This I foretell. A pall of silence clung to the room, broken only by Margase expelling her breath as if it were her last. Elaide continued to stare into Rand's eyes. She spoke again, barely moving her lips, so softly that he could barely hear her less than an arm's length away. This, too, I foretell. Pain and division come to the whole world, and this man stands at the heart of it. I obey the queen, she whispered, and speak it clearly. Rand felt as if his feet had become rooted in the marble floor. The cold and stiffness of the stone crept up his legs and sent a shiver up his spine. No one else could have heard, but she was still looking at him, and he had heard. I'm a shepherd, he said for the entire room, from the two rivers. A shepherd. The will weaves as the will wills, Elaide said aloud. And he could not tell if there was a touch of mockery in her tone or not. Lord Gareth, Margase said, I need the advice of my Captain General. The blocky man shook his head. Elaide Sedai says the lad is dangerous, my lady, or my queen. And if she could tell more, I would say summon the headsman. But all she says is what any of us can see with our own eyes. There's not a farmer in the countryside won't say things will get worse without any foretelling. Myself, I believe the boy is here through mere happenstance, than an ill one for him. Though an ill one for him. To be safe, my lady, my queen, I say clap him in a cell till the Lady Elaine and the Lord Gawain are well on their way, then let him go, unless, Aes Sedai, you have more to foretell concerning him. I have said all that I have read in the pattern, Lord Captain General, Elaide said. She flashed a hard smile at Rand, a smile that barely bent her lips, mocking his inability to say that she was not telling the truth. A few weeks' imprisonment will not harm him, and it may give me a chance to learn more. Hunger filled her eyes, deepening his chill. Perhaps another foretelling will come. For a time, Margase considered, chin on her fist and elbow on the arm of her throne. Rand would have shifted under her frowning gaze if he could have moved at all, but Elaine's eyes froze him solid. Finally, the queen spoke. Suspicion is smothering Camlin, perhaps all of Andor. Fear and black suspicion. Women denounce their neighbors for dark friends. Men scrawl the dragon's fang on the doors of people they have known for years. I will not become part of it. Margase, Elaide began, but the queen cut her off. I will not become part of it. When I took the throne, I swore to uphold justice for the high and the low, and I will uphold it even if I am the last in Andor to remember justice. Rand al'Thor, do you swear under the light that your father, a shepherd in two rivers, gave you this heron-marked blade? Rand worked his mouth to get enough moisture to speak. I do. Abruptly remembering to whom he was speaking, he hastily added, my queen. Lord Gareth raised an eyebrow, but Margase did not seem to mind. And you climbed the garden wall simply to gain a look at the false dragon? Yes, my queen. Do you mean harm to the throne of Andor, or to my daughter, or my son? Her tone said the last two would gain him even shorter shrift than the first. I mean no harm to anyone, my queen, to you and yours at least of all. I will give you justice then, Rand al'Thor, she said, first because I have the advantage of Elaide and Gareth in having heard Two Rivers' speech. When I was young, you have not the look, but if a dim memory can serve me, you have the Two Rivers on your tongue. Second, no one with your hair and eyes would claim that he is a Two Rivers shepherd unless it was true. and that your father gave you a hair-marked blade is too preposterous to be a lie. And third, the voice that whispers to me that the best lie is often one too ridiculous to be taken for a lie. That voice is not proof. I will uphold the laws I have made. I give you your freedom, Randolph Thor, but I suggest you take a care where you trespass in the future. If you are found on the palace grounds again, it will not go so easily with you. Thank you, my queen, he said hoarsely. He could feel Elaine's displeasure with a heat on his face. Talonvor, Margay said, escort my daughter's guest from the palace and show him every courtesy. The rest of you go as well. No, Elaide, you stay. And if you will too, please, Lord Gareth, I must decide what to do about these white cloaks in the city. Talonvor and the guardsmen sheathed their swords reluctantly, ready to draw again in an instant. Still, Rand was glad to let the soldiers form a hollow box around him and to follow Talonvor. Elaide was only half attending what the queen was saying. He could feel her eyes on his back. What would have happened if Morghese had not kept the Aes Sedai with her? The thought made him wish the soldiers would walk faster. To his surprise, Elaine and Gareth exchanged a few words outside the door, then fell in beside him. Talonvor was surprised too. The young officer looked from them back to the doors, closing now. My mother, Elaine said, ordered him to be escorted from the palace, Talonvor, with every courtesy. What are you waiting for? Talonvor scowled at the doors, behind which the queen was conferring with her advisors. Nothing, my lady, he said sourly, and needlessly ordered the escort forward. The wonders of the palace slid by Rand unseen. He was befuddled. Snatches of thought spinning by too fast to grasp. You have not the look. This man stands at the heart of it. The escort stopped. He blinked, startled to find himself in the great court at the front of the palace, standing at the tall gilded gates gleaming in the sun. Those gates would not be opened for a single man, certainly not for a trespasser, even if the daughter heir did claim guest right for him. Wordlessly, Talonvor unbarred a sally port, a small door set within one gate. It is the custom, Elaine said, to escort guests as far as the gates, but not to watch them go. It is the pleasure of a guest's company that should be remembered, not the sadness of parting. Thank you, my lady, Rand said. He touched the scarf bandaging his head. For everything, custom in the Two Rivers is for a guest to bring a small gift. I'm afraid I have nothing, although, he added dryly, apparently I did teach you something of the Two River folk. If I had told Mother I think you are handsome, she certainly would have had you locked in a cell. Elaine favored him with a dazzling smile. Fare you well, Randolph Thor. Gaping, he watched her go, a younger version of Morghese's beauty and majesty. Do not try to bandy words with her, Gawain laughed. She will win every time. Rand nodded absently. Handsome light, the daughter heir to the throne of Andar. He gave himself a shake to clear his head. Gawain seemed to be waiting for something. Rand looked at him for a moment. My lord, when I told you I was from the Two Rivers, you were surprised, and everyone else. Your mother, Lord Gareth. Elaide said a shiver ran down his back. None of them. He could not finish it. He was not even sure why he started. I am Tam Althor, stunned, even if I was not born in the Two Rivers. Gawain nodded as if it was for this he had been waiting. Still he hesitated. Rand opened his mouth to take back the unspoken question, and Gawain said, wrap a shufa around your head, Rand, and you would be the image of an ailment. Odd, since Mother seems to think you sound like a Two Rivers man, at least. I wish we could have come to know one another. Rand Althor fairly well. An ailment. Rand stood watching Gawain's retreating back until an impatient cough from Talonvor reminded him where he was. He ducked through the sally port, barely clearing his heels before Talonbor slammed it behind him. The bars inside were jammed into place loudly. The oval plaza in front of the palace was empty for now. All the soldiers gone, all the crowds, trumpets, and drums vanished in silence. Nothing left but a scattering of litter blowing across the pavement and a few people hurrying about their business now that the excitement was done. He could not make out if they showed the red or the white. Ailment. With a start, he realized he was standing right in front of the palace gates, right where Elaide could find him easily once she finished with the queen. Pulling his cloak close, he broke into a trot across the plaza and into the streets of the inner city. He looked back frequently to see if anyone was following him, but the sweeping curves kept him from seeing very far. He could remember Elaide's eyes all too well, though, and imagined them watching by the time he reached the gates to the new city he was running. And that is the end of chapter 40. And I'll be reading chapter 41 next time I do a recording. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend that you watch the Wheel of Time series on Amazon Prime. And I want to thank everyone for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will put my contact information in the description down below in case anybody wants to contact me or send me something. As always, everyone have a wonderful day and be safe. Bye-bye.